to Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave, where we are on a journey to answer 4 leadership questions from some of the best leaders and leadership minds in America. So we are here today with Dr. Mark Smith. We're happy to have him as a special guest. So welcome, Mark.
Thanks for having me, Dave. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Definitely looking forward to it too. So introduce yourself to our listeners, kind of, a little bit of your background, kind of who you are and what you do.
Okay, great. So I have a Ph.D. in organizational psychology, and after that, I've really been working with companies for most of my career.
Okay.
Typically doing hiring processes, and then lots of assessments and assessments of all different types for both applicants and current employees. And after that, then I was at the Society for Human Resource Management for a few years, and now I'm back in consulting, doing my own stuff. I recently wrote a book, and there are lots of things to talk about today.
Nice. We definitely want to get to the book. We definitely want to get to the SHRM stuff. A whole lot of great things to get to. But with that, let's hop into the first question. So what does leadership mean to you, and what does good leadership look like?
Yeah. I mean, this is such a broad topic, a general topic. There's so many different ways to go with this. And when I speak on this, a lot of times I like to use metaphors. So
Okay.
I can talk about leadership in multiple different ways. If I go back in my life 30 years ago or whatever, I was pretty heavy into football, high school, played a little bit in college. And so what does leadership look like? There's a football coaching aspect to it, which is very applicable to organizations. And so some of the times the football coaches that I'll talk to, they'll say, well, good coaching, good leadership by the outcome. So if we win, then I did a good job. If we lose, I didn't. And of course, there's more to it than that.
Yeah.
But when we think about this type of leadership, it's really the planning, getting the stuff together, putting the people in the right position to succeed, and that starts months before games start in terms of putting people in the best position, and then making sure during each game they're in the right place, they're doing the right things. But it's more than just moving the pieces around. There's motivating the team. And then there's also, and this is a big part of it, adapting, as things happen. Okay, not everything is going to be successful. Can you adapt in real time, and can you overcome when the bad things do happen, because they always do. They always happen.
Oh yes.
And I guess my favorite analogy here is we go back to Bill Parcells, old coach of the Giants, coached number of other NFL teams, but old coach of the Giants, and very well regarded Super Bowl winner. Later in his career, he would say, "If you want me to cook the dinner, you need to let me shop for the groceries." And that was recognizing that I need to be, if not in charge, involved in determining who the players are on the team to begin with. And that's such a big, important part of leadership is not just motivating the team, and it's not just moving the pieces around, but it's getting those pieces to begin with. And when we think of it in terms of regular organizations, it's I need to be involved in the recruiting and the hiring, because if my team is going to be good, if my organization is going to be effective, it's because we have to hire right. And hire right is going to mean multiple things that we can go into it. And so that's my football a metaphor. But I also, and this represents an evolution of my life as well. I'll also take a different perspective on leadership, which is a much more, I would say, in the weeds sort of teamwork perspective on leadership too. My wife and I have been, so after football, my wife and I have been ballroom dancing for the last 20 years or so.
Oh, very cool.
And so when we talk about partner dancing, you're partners there, and partners in a literal sense. You're co-equals, but somebody has to be the leader, and somebody has to sort of naturally be the follower. And so typically, and this is not always the case anymore, typically it's the guy's the leader, the lady is the follower, and that's not a hierarchy there. But again, somebody has to be the leader, and somebody has to be the follower. And there, when we talk about leadership, I think about it in very different ways than that football analogy. And so, I have to decide where we're going to go or what move we're going to do. And some of the times we like to say, it's up to me to open the door, but I can't force her through it.
Right.
I have to make it seem like that's the most natural thing in the world, is for her to go through the door that I just opened. But it's up to her. So it's me determining what I think as a partnership we should do. She has to willingly go along with it. And so I need to, as a leader, do it as nicely, as clearly, that's a big thing, as clearly as possible. So she'll want to do it, but also she'll feel completely natural in doing it.
Nice, nice, nice. Well, it's funny you talked about being able to make decisions in the football analogy, be able to make decisions on the fly, and hey, I've got a plan, but maybe you have to pivot halfway
Right?
through. And I wanted to jump in real bad and like, yeah, it sounds like the famous American philosopher Mike Tyson. We all have a plan until you get punched in the face.
That's entirely true. And that's the case with boxing, and that's the case with football, and that's the case with so many different things. And most organizations can, totally identify with a statement like that, because it's not all wins. Occasionally, you're with an organization that is successful virtually all the time, but that's the exception. That's not the rule.
Yeah. No, you hopefully rack up enough wins to like Simon Sinek with talking about the infinite game, racking up just enough of wins to keep playing the game.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So I'll want to keep playing the game, but also so it sort of benefits
Hey,
me to continue. Yeah.
right. I mean, physically, are we winning enough deals? Are we doing enough business? Are we doing it so we can we keep the lights on and payroll? We can keep playing the game, not just want to. So that's
Yeah.
a big one too.
Yeah. Right. So yeah. So those are sort of my two leadership analogies, but in there, sort of both of that, especially with the Bill Parcells quote,
Right.
and then the sort of leadership partnership that you have going on. It's not about just, oh, I need the best people. Yeah, you need good people on your team, but you got to have a good fit.
Yeah.
And for so many of us, and I think we realize this as we go through our lives and our careers, we aren't just a collection of positive attributes.
Mm.
We've got some strengths and we got some weaknesses. And early in our career, maybe we don't even know what those weaknesses are.
Right.
But the vast majority of us, we've got plenty of strengths and we've got plenty of weaknesses. And so it's about, for me as a person, it's about finding that place where I can succeed. I can maximize my strengths and minimize my weaknesses. And then as organizations, it's determining, when they're selecting people, what types of people would really fit me best. And again, it's not just, can I find the perfect person? Because yeah, maybe there are a few of those which are just nothing but strengths. But there's only one Jesus, right? Um,
Exactly.
right. And so it's what strengths do I really need for my new employee? So if I'm hiring my new employee, and then what things on the weakness side aren't really weaknesses here? They're just part of what makes this person human. So what don't I need a strength in, is another way to think about it.
No, that's not bad. I like looking at it that way because you're right. It's and I wanted to kind of look at your sports analogy one more time and kind of compare and contrast the difference between, you talked about not necessarily having to have the best people, right? But having good people and a good fit and the team. Think about a basketball team of a great team working together that makes championships versus a group of individual superstars coming
Right.
together.
Right.
So, the difference between one and the other. I'd love to get your thoughts on, oh, I'm going to find the best. And so you put all these, I hate to say, not trying to castigate, but, prima donna superstars, that are like,
Right.
I'm the best, it's me, 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 me. Well, if everybody's on the team is an opera singer and it's all about me, 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 then I don't think the team's going to do quite as well as they think they're going to. What are your
Well,
thoughts?
probably not, but it really depends on the situation. And again, in the sports metaphor, the type of sport that we're dealing with here. And we'll talk about teams in this context, and there are some teams, and this gets a little weird. There are some teams that, or some team sports that really aren't that teamy. They're just a series of individuals, and then
I
there are
got,
other sports that everybody's relying on each other at all times, and
mm,
those sports really, that's where you need the fit. And it's not about the best players, it's about the best team. But when I think of baseball, there's actually on the field very little interaction between those players, especially when they're batting on an offense. It's just a series of individual contests. So in that case, you can kind of make the case it is about the collection of individual talent. For something like football, it's probably as good example as any. Maybe soccer.
right.
It's about the players working together, and then in the leadership, it's about the coach putting those players in there. I always question in baseball, like how important is the manager really?
Mm, good question. I don't know. I mean, you get at some degree, like I said, there is especially on the field when you're defense. I mean, there's a degree of okay, we got to know what we're going to do in the situation, in that situation, practice drill, so on and so forth. But you're right; it's not the same as got a basketball team or a football team that, like I said, they absolutely if they're not working together super
Right.
effectively as a team, they're just not going to be successful.
Yeah, that's right. And so yeah, again, there are team sports, and then there are team sports, and
Yes.
uh, and baseball is kind of a series of individual matchups. Soccer, basketball, football, those are much more the teams have to work together, and if they don't, then you're not going to be successful.
Yeah, and that's why I thought in my mind, like you specifically thinking basketball. You've got three or four that are out there, your first string that are, let's say, individual superstars. It's all about them. At some point, they're not going to be the ones necessarily that win the championships just because they were able to hire, quote, the best players.
Right, right. Although it's not to diminish individual talent. There
No,
has to be a
no,
certain
no,
amount
no,
of
not a
individual
bit. But
talent.
no, you'd be the best person in the world. But like I said, if you need to thrive in a team environment and you can't get along with people, at some
Right,
point, okay, they can put you the team leader all day long, but at some point you piss everybody off, and you're like,
right,
okay, I'm done with you, right? I don't care. I'll go to
right.
another team. I'll do something else. Like I'll fail just to spite you, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Mr. Team leader who's not, yeah, he's just being a jerk. So yeah, I kind of let's say there's that balance. I said talent, but also how well they communicate, they collaborate, how well they work together, overall as a team. So I guess
Yep.
kind of digging in a little bit on the second part of the question, then since we kind of get an idea of different types of leadership from different contexts and different viewpoints. So what does kind of good leadership look like?
Yeah. So to me, it's the influencing other, and it's the planning and putting people in the right situation. But it starts with getting the right people on the team, and
Mm,
and making sure that you understand what it takes to be successful, and then that you can actually find those things. It's one thing to say, "Oh, I need these eight things in my next new hire," and it's another thing to actually find that and then hire that person. So you really have to understand the needs of the open role, and then find the person who actually has that. And again, it's less about finding the perfect person, and it's more about finding the best fit, and the best fit from a hard skills perspective and from a cognitive ability perspective, also the best fit from soft skills from a personality perspective.
Absolutely. I was to say, they don't, you can always develop skills. And I've seen folks where they've hired them and say, hey, this is definitely the best fit. We needed, you said 8 things. We need these 8 things. They're great at 6 of them, 2 of them, but at least we know that,
Right.
this is a little bit, it's not as strong as it needs to be. I hate to say it's a weakness, but they're not as developed or they're not as strong in it as they could be, or we really need them to be. But we know we got 6 out of 8 and we like the person. They're a great fit. We can work on developing the other 2. That's just a onboarding and development opportunity at that point versus, hey, I've got the guy who's got all 8, but he just doesn't fit.
Right. Completely agree.
Cool.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, this is a great place to end this segment. And so we will be back with conversations on leadership with Dr. Dave here in just a few moments. Welcome back to Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave, where we are here with special guest, Dr. Mark Smith, and we're going to jump straight into our second question. So, what was one of the biggest leadership challenges you've had to face?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think of myself, it's like, am I a leader? And it's sort of, I think we all have to ask ourselves that at times, and what does that mean for us? And but really, go back to earlier in my career, it was really finding myself and finding my style, if I even have a consistent style, or had a consistent style, and really determining that. And again, early in careers, especially maybe fresh out of school, it's like, what do you really know about yourself? You've probably had some experiences, but those experiences, the sports experiences, they're applicable, but it's not that they're the same. You can sort of use analogies and stuff, but it's not the same. And then especially when it comes to leadership, yeah, you've probably had, you're 25 or 28 or whatever. You've probably had some jobs, but you weren't really in a work leadership position there. And so you really have to, and again, this happens for most people early in their careers. You have to find yourself. And I know some people, they talking to them later in their careers, they never really found themselves.
True.
Yeah, and then the question comes up, okay, well, where does that come from? And so, somebody's leadership style, where does that leadership style come from? And it's going to come from your innermost being, your personality, and your motivations that we know in psychology is at least partly, you're sort of baked in there. And so you're kind of born with certain things, but there are other things that come as a result of our experiences, our early life experience that maybe we don't even remember, our experience through school, and again the sports and stuff comes up here. So how are you going to be as a leader, if that's even a position or a way that you want to think about yourself? And then, for a lot of people, it's early career stuff. What happens to them early in their career? And here, often what we'll see or think about is early supervisors, early leaders that they worked with, provide the model that often that's what the person is going to follow until maybe they realize that's leading them astray.
It's funny you mentioned that because I I incorporated it to some of my presentations and keynotes, but it's funny because I actually have had folks ask me, well, how did you get into doing this? Or what was your kind of motivation for doing this? It's funny you talk about modeling because, in a presentation, I just have a blank white slide up there with a big chicken sandwich right in the middle of it. Right. And I'm like, well, it's all the fault of a chicken sandwich. And they're like, Like I got 3 heads. So like, what the heck? And I'm like, all right, let me explain. I talked to him about how first W-2 job I had, cut grass, do odd jobs, whatever. But the first time you get a W-2 paycheck, it was 15 and a half, and I had to go down to the city and get a little work permit, right? Because I wasn't 16 yet. And I had a friend of mine that worked at Chick-fil-A. And this was long before the My Pleasure. There was no cows. It was just in the mall, drab brown polyester and chicken, right? That's it. It was funny because I really enjoyed working there. I mean, a friend of mine's like, hey, you come down here. It's great. I love it. It's blah, blah, blah. And of course, I mean, no pay. It's fast food. It's hard work, so on and so forth. But everybody really enjoyed coming to work and, got a great environment. And yeah, I mean, you're busier than a one-armed, wallpaper hanger during Christmas. I mean, it's just insane how busy it was. But always had big Christmas parties, super appreciation. It was just a great place to work. Everybody looked forward to coming to work. It wasn't just the owner operators, all the management, right?
Right.
I didn't know any better. That's work, right? You collected a paycheck for 3 or 4 years. That's work. Well, then you leave, and then you realize you go somewhere and you have a say less than stellar boss, or not necessarily bad boss, but you go somewhere and it's different. You're like, wait a minute, why? Wait a minute, why this isn't cool? Why is it like this? Why isn't it like that? And of course, you get into this. Well, boy, that doesn't exist. They're like, look, old man, I just spent a pretty significant percentage of my born days on this earth, 3 or 4 years working in that. I just left that. I know it exists. I literally just left it. You're like, you don't know what you're talking about, but like that doesn't exist. So like, look, old man, you're full of it. I'm telling you, I just left it. It does exist. And there's kind of that cognitive dissonance on, wait a minute, what the heck, So then I realized, I was in the fire department for a long time, and I first started with this old rickety fire station with these clipboards for the checkoff sheets, right, for the old trucks. And I always thought in my head, it was always like, okay, I had 2 clipboards hanging right next to each other on cup hooks, right? What to do when I'm the boss, right? All the cool stuff. And then the one, what not to do, right? The bad thing is beyond the Chick-fil-A, I like maybe had a couple, half a page maybe on the what to do, and the what not to do was almost like that old green and white, dot matrix paper that just went on forever, right? And I kept thinking, all right, I'm not the brightest bulb in the marquee, but if I just literally do the opposite of the what not to do, I'm probably going to turn out like halfway okay.
Right. But with that, and that I always like to say this, and I don't go back to clinical psychology much. I don't consider myself at all sort of related to clinical psychology. But there's a story of 2 brothers, and their father was a raging alcoholic, and one of the brothers later in his life, he never drank, and he said, and he was talking to somebody, and he says, well, of course I never drink. I have my dad as an example of what happens when you drink, and there's no way that I'll touch this stuff. And the same situation, his brother is a raging alcoholic, and he says, of course I'm a raging alcoholic. My dad was the only example that I had, and it's his fault that I'm drinking. So it's the alcoholic father's fault that his son doesn't drink at all, and his other son is an alcoholic. So the same situation can lead to 2 very different outcomes.
Oh, 100%. And like I said, I've taken a lot of similar classes. I heard that story before quite a bit, but it was interesting because it took me a while to realize in the case with the first W-2 job, working at Chick-fil-A, I didn't realize at first, like, oh, wait a minute, this stuff doesn't happen on accident.
Right.
This, like, he intentionally created this culture, this environment, this atmosphere, the way it was set. I mean, all of that. And then once that kind of dawned on me, then I was just, but the difference between that culture and situation and lots of other places I'd been, then I was just, all right, I got to figure out why, right? I mean, at some point, I got to learn, what did this guy do, right? I would, dig in and learn as much about how do you build those types of cultures and environments and organizations and teams. And I'm like, because, I mean, you saw an example of somebody doing it right.
Right.
And then you go over there and like everything else, like nowhere even close. You're like, okay, like this doesn't happen by accident. How did he do it? And so that's one of the big reasons of jumping in and going back to school to try to learn more about, okay, well, how did this guy put the pieces of the puzzle together to make this thing happen?
Right. And then in our analogies here, where it's a lot of the early career stuff is shaping, you know, what we think leadership is or how we think leadership should be. Then it's the next point is, well, not everybody has that good example early in their career. Not everybody started at Chick-fil-A.
No.
Okay, so because not everybody started there, how do we get, everybody or most leaders uh, on the right track, at least eventually, because some started in a good situation and some started in a bad situation. So how do we get those people who started in a bad situation, on a good path, just understanding what a good path is. And there we can talk about some of the leadership development that companies at least try to do now, some successful and some not.
100%. Well, that's one of the reasons why I really wrap my head around the whole like what to do and what not to do. Because like even if you had like horrible or no examples of, hey, this is a great way, this is a leader that you want to have as a mentor. This is somebody as a guide, or you want to emulate the way this, him or her decided to lead. Great. If you didn't have that and you had nothing but crappy bosses, it's just like, okay, well, it's kind of like, in a psychometric assessment, hey, you ways to communicate with Mark, ways not to
Right.
communicate with Mark, right? Well,
Right.
this is the stuff that'll trigger, right? Versus
Right.
it's just good practice. So it's kind of like if I just actively avoid wow, my boss is a jerk. Okay, well, maybe when I get to be the boss, I'm not going to be a jerk, right? I'll just
Right.
start there, and just avoid the crappy stuff you've always seen. I mean, it's not perfect, but at least it'll get you in the ballpark of,
Right.
at least I know what I don't want to happen. And sometimes it's almost like career. I've heard somebody use that analogy for career advice too. Like, well, what do you want to do? I don't know. Well, what do you not want to do? I don't want to do this. Okay, cool. I don't want to be this. Okay, cool. But, I don't want to make 20 grand a year for the rest of my life. All right, that's a good start. Let's look at something that
Right.
makes a little bit more minimum wage,
Right.
right? I,
Right.
I, I don't want to be working at some, dirty, whatever, coal mine, and I laugh because a lot of times they'll say manufacturing, and I've done enough business and interviews with folks in manufacturing that sometimes it's air conditioned and it's clean and you can eat off the floor, and
Right.
it's not what people envision in their head as dirty, greasy, sweaty, horrible job, right? So, but we stereotype that. It's like, what do you not want to do? And a lot of times that narrowing down exercise of for careers, what do they not want?
Right.
Ends up okay. Well, now we've kind of narrowed the lanes a little bit about some way where you could go, and it's kind of the same thing almost with leadership. I think it's like if I narrow down the lane on what I don't want, or what's horrible thing has happened to me in the past, just in the same way narrow down to, well, I haven't worked for a great leader before who's been a wonderful mentor, but at least I'm kind of closer to that than I was before.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, we can start to talk about um, how to develop people into better leaders. If that's where you want to go next.
Well, we got that on question number 4. We definitely
Okay.
we'll front load that into the last question. But the next question, though, I do want to go ahead and jump on because it will kind of ponytail into that a little bit. Is what do you see as one of the biggest mistakes leaders make today?
Yeah, and again, we'll go back to some of the things that I talked about a little earlier. Um, I think as big as any mistake is not getting the right people on the team, not getting the right people in the right roles. So hiring wrong is a big issue, and as a leader, it has to be part of the role of putting the right people in the right places, the right situations for them to be successful, for the whole group to be successful, but also for each person to be successful. It doesn't behoove the leader at all to put people in places where they're ultimately going to fail. So
Oh, I,
hiring wrong.
I agree with that 100%. So what advice would you give leaders that get hired? They're the ones that get hired, right? Apparently, they come in new into an organization. They inherit a team that's maybe been there for a while. Maybe they don't have the opportunity right now to
Right.
replace folks. What would you recommend to leaders that are like, I would love to handpick my championship team, but I'm stuck with this?
Yeah. Well, you you can always move pieces around. So in terms of, assuming that your team is a reasonable size and there are some different roles on the team, some of the times it's a matter of shifting the thing. One, it stops people from stagnating. If you can just move roles around, you get more cross training, you get more available backup kind of behaviors, and so
Nice.
that, it makes the whole situation more interesting. It's less boring for people, and so that's at the very least, I think you can do that. But
Cool.
as I say, hiring, right, and that's really been the focus of most of my career, is helping companies uh, determine who's the best fit for the role, determine what fit for the role actually looks like, and then executing on that. And that was something that, again, and I go back even before I went to grad school. So it was, this was the thing that was interesting to me, is how to determine who should be. And then I'll go back to sports, because it was how to determine who should be part of the team. Uh,
Yeah.
and then that became IO psychology, organizational psychology, how to determine who you should select for your organization.
No, that makes perfect sense. And I know we're going to talk about it a lot more later, but when you were talking about going back to some of the things you had done, you had mentioned that you recently had a book that came out. Tell us a little bit
Yeah,
about
right.
that.
And
We'll get a lot more into it at the very end as we kind of how to connect with you and stuff like that.
right.
But tell us a little bit about the process that kind of went into putting that together.
Yeah. So a couple of months ago, I published this book, A Better Choice, The Manager's Guide to Skills First Hiring. And it's really about how to hire people in the best way. And traditionally, one of the, if not the first things people would talk about in terms of open roles, would be level of education that you need, and
Right.
years of experience in whatever.
Yeah.
And those things, I understand why they are attractive. They're attractive because they're easy to assess, they're easy to measure. Oh,
Yep.
he has a bachelor's degree. I can verify that. I understand what that means, and so many companies have historically used that and continue to use that. But once you start going beyond, this is what we've always done, and you start to get into the why question, then the argument for using education, using degrees as a screener, in a lot of cases just falls apart. Like, it doesn't
Yeah.
make sense in a lot of cases. Now, if it's a technical job, if it's a job that requires it because of some sort of licensure reason, then yes, you
100%.
need a college degree, but you don't need a college degree. In most cases, you need something relatively specific. Yeah,
Yeah.
if with some exceptions, my wife is an engineer, she's a PE, and so in order to get that professional designation, she needed to go to school in engineering. If somebody wants to be a registered nurse, they need that kind of educational background. But if you're hiring a salesperson, you don't need a bachelor's degree, and a
Yeah.
bachelor's degree doesn't make you more qualified than the bachelor's person. It just doesn't.
No. At that point, you're all, and correct me if I'm wrong, but at that point, you're only looking at the bachelor's degree as a measure of persistence. Like, I set my nose to the grind for 4 years to accomplish X, and I did. Right. They gave me some tasks, maybe write some papers, do some research. I did what they asked, at least well enough to get a passing grade.
Right.
And, after 4 years, okay, here you go. But, that's not the same as, like you said, I have to have a Juris Doctor to sit for the
Right.
bar, right? I have to have
Right.
an MD to take my licensing exams for, or like you said, have the engineering degree to get the PE. Like, I have to have the licensure, so I have to have this to get there. But I don't know. I always looked at it as employees were looking at it as more of a measure of persistence, or that you stuck to one thing for a certain amount of time. But beyond that, I'm like, what is my bachelor's in interdisciplinary basket weaving going to
Right.
have on this job that I'm doing?
Yeah, and maybe there's some. reason to use bachelor's degree to determine if somebody is persistent enough. But it's not just persistence. It's for a lot of students. Are you willing to take out 6 figures of debt?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, should you force somebody to do that just to show that they're persistent, when I'd rather measure persistence with a personality measure, or maybe a couple of personality measures? We'll talk about it in the interview. We don't need to force somebody to spend all this money, and it's not just money, it's time. To force somebody to spend that much time
Yeah.
in school. And if you look back, okay, most people, let's say the average life expectancy is 80. Okay, you're asking somebody to spend 5% of their life to get this degree, when it's really not providing them with the thing that you actually care about. I mean, it's it's crazy. I think largely we should stop it. And again, in my book, I have outlined what a proper, in sometimes in HR we'll talk about applicant flow as a funnel, as a proper process where we're eliminating education primarily, and to some extent years of experience, from the top of it, and we're replacing it with other things, and then we're getting to the right final selection without using those maybe misleading or inappropriate things at the top end.
Nice. Well, I want to throw this out before we wrap up this segment, and then we'll get into the final question, which will really kind of get into the meat of what you put together. You're right. The bachelor's is kind of like, okay, well, why? And I would love to be a fly on the wall, excuse me, for some of the conversations where you tell an HR department, yeah, this is really, you don't need to have this on there anymore, and watch them lose their mind on, what do you mean I don't? We've always required a bachelor's for X, and really the justification, it just falls into the, well, we've always done it this way. So watching some of the freak out factor would just be fun from an entertaining standpoint, just to be honest with you, when you break that news to them. But it's funny you talk about years of experience, and I mentioned on another podcast, I was a fly on the wall at the time, and it was kind of a young buck in the fire department, and one of these old master firefighters, crotchety deal, back and forth and back and forth. And, is the, I've got 30 years of experience, whatever. And it's like, because, and then the younger kid's been there 4 years or whatever, and he's classes and certifications and so on and so forth, and entertaining for me. But the snarky remark from the younger guy was, well, do you actually have 30 years experience, old man, or do you just have 1 year of experience that you've rinsed and repeated 29 times? And I was like, ooh, that stings.
Great question.
Just a thought.
Yeah.
But then you've been on the other end of it, where it's like, kid comes right out of school into a profession, and it's kind of like, oh, I know every way to do it, and I'm an expert, and I'm whatever. It's like you're literally like 2 months out of school, man. You're not an expert in anything, right? And then you almost get to the point where it's like, well, when I've been doing this job longer than you've been on God's green earth, it's kind of like it's both sides of that coin. Let's put it that way. So
yeah, but the assumption that everybody who has more experience is more knowledgeable than the person who has less experience, that's an assumption I'm not willing to make. Now, there are certain things where you can only pick it up on the job, certain types of knowledge, some sort of procedural types of things. But a lot of times you'll see this in job postings, requires 10 years of experience in, X. And well, what if somebody has 7 years of experience in that? Am I willing to say that they're less knowledgeable than somebody with 11 years of experience? I mean, maybe they are, but I don't know that. We're making this assumption that I don't think we should be making.
now at that point, you're splitting hairs.
Right.
And you're
But
probably,
again, you see that. You
yeah,
see it regularly.
Oh, I no doubt, and you're probably excluding exceptional candidates because, like you said, they have 7 and not 10, or they have 8.5 and not 12, whatever it is. You're probably getting rid of some really good candidates that probably would be a lot better fit than the guy who's just been doing a little bit longer, just the rinse and repeat.
That's right.
All right, well, it's a perfect place to end this segment. And we will come back with our last question here on Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave in just a moment. And welcome back to our final segment of Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave. And we're here with special guest, Dr. Mark Smith. And our last question is, what do you think is the best way for leaders to improve their leadership skills?
Yeah, and this is a good question, and again, as people evolve in their careers as leaders, I think a lot of times they start to see, oh, I'm good here, I'm good in these situations, I'm not so good in these situations, and the first way to think about that, how to improve as a leader, is to, okay, if it's possible, avoid the types of situations where you're not effective. There's
Yeah.
the old joke, "Hey doc, it hurts when I do this," and the
Yeah.
doctor says, "Stop doing that." Right? Okay. Hey, I'm not effective in these types of high pressure situations, and it's like, do you have to be in those situations? And then sometimes it's like, well, no, actually, there are other people who could do that better than me. And you go, okay, well then maybe that's the easiest solution. But
Yeah.
barring just avoid those situations, it's um, when I think about leadership development, so much of it comes down to experiences. It's not about training classes, although it can be a little bit, and it's not about books that you've read, although those can be helpful.
Yeah.
It's about the experiences, and so then it's the question is going to be, how can I put my developing leaders in these situations where they're going to be exposed to new types of things and they're going to get new experiences when I know I might be putting in a position to fail, right? This is a person who's never been in that before. How, in good conscience, can
Right.
I? And so it's the leadership development. A lot of times, it's providing these new or veteran, somehow developing leaders. How can I put them in a situation where it's safe to fail, where maybe they'll succeed and that'll be great, and maybe they won't succeed and it won't be the end of the world because they're going to learn from it. And so
Yeah.
a lot of times that's where the learning comes from, right?
Yeah. Oh, and I agree 100% here. It's funny because I talk about that quite a bit. It's like you've got to give your up and coming leaders opportunities to practice the skills.
Right.
Talk about using analogies. I mean, I had been a paramedic for a while and, was in that realm. And, I was pretty happy at the time at the city that I worked for. It was, high crime, high call volume. I mean, lots of experience, get to learn a lot, hands on type of thing. And, I was always yeah, I'm the one running out of the burning building. You lost your mind. I'm not joining the fire department until they tried to take over the city's EMS agency and failed the first time. And I'm like, I really got this bad addiction to like 3 squares a day and a roof over my head. Right. Like it's like a bad crack habit. I can't beat it. Right. So it's
Right.
like, I might, I'd like to keep my job here. Right. So I ended up, bailing and going to the fire department and still kind of one of them final interview with the chief, man. Hey, why do you want this job? And people say, oh, always dreamed of being this. And I played with it, little fire trucks sort of going. I'm like, man, I need a job, man. I said, I like working here for the ambulance service and, the 911 EMS agency. And I said, I want to keep working here. And I see the writing on the wall, man. You guys are going to take it over. And at some point, I don't want to be, without a chair when
That's right.
when
When
the
the music
music
stops.
stops. The funny part about that, where it relates to training, is from not wanting to ever do this at all, just wanting to keep a job. About halfway through rookie school, we're all to the point, even me, we're all to the point like, if you don't give us something to burn down, we're going to burn this building down. You can't keep teaching us stuff and not letting us go out and do it. Right.
Right.
And I mean, we were itching to get to a training fire at that point. We're like, okay, enough. We got to go do this. And it was funny because I related that to, up and coming leaders. It's like you could train them all day long, but at some point they're going to get flustered with you, your organization, the process, everything, if you don't give them chances to go out and
Right.
have their own training fires and
Right.
giving them tasks that if they fail, it's not going to bankrupt the company. It's not such high stake it's nothing high stake.
Yep. Yep. And so for leadership development kind of thing, I think in a lot of cases it's putting these developing leaders in new situations, and so they will be able to develop themselves, but
Right.
it's not the end of the world if they're not effective. And so some of the times that's going to be, these role play kind of situations. It's going to be assessment centers, but it can't just be, this overly fake kind of thing. There has to be a certain amount of realism to it, because otherwise it's not real experience at that point. And so again, the safe place to fail. And some of the times there are internal groups that, maybe it's a task force, putting together the party planning committee or whatever, and Brett on your team has never been a leader of anything. Well, you make him leader of the party planning committee, because it's
Right.
not the end of the world if the party is terrible.
Yeah, exactly. You're not gonna. It's not terribly customer facing, and nobody's gonna fuss at
Right.
you. But so much if it turns out to just be a disaster.
Right. Right. And then also even it's safe in terms of like psychologically safe. And so if you push, and let's say you have a new leader who's been in a leadership position for 2 years, um, you give them a 360-degree feedback assessment. So
Right.
you get feedback on them from their supervisors, their peers, their subordinates, especially that first time. It has to be developmental in nature, and it can't be, oh, if this person doesn't do well, we're just going to get rid of them, because there's going to be no learning there. They're going to be too worried to learn.
Yeah.
And so it's in all cases for development purposes, is very different. I had an old professor at USF. He was old when I went through school. He had a paper in the 1970s, which was the most cited paper in Harvard Business Review in the 1970s. And
Wow.
yeah, right, exactly. It was called Split Roles and Performance Appraisal, and that was the notion was, if you're using performance appraisal for like determining raises, people don't listen to the feedback, and so you need to have sort of two different processes for that. If you say, well, we're measuring their performance, therefore we can use it for determining who gets the biggest bonus and to give them feedback, people don't listen to the feedback, and that was the upshot there. And I think it works in leadership development too. If you're serious about developing, it can't be I'm worried about losing my job. It has to be positive, developmental in nature.
Yeah, I like that. I'd agree with that 100%, because if, like you said, why all you're worried about is, am I going to get my 3% this year, right? Or am I
Right.
going to get my bonus, or am I going to keep my job? Honestly, and like you said, it's just everything just drones in one ear and out the other, and a yearly performance evaluation. When okay, all of this stuff rides on it. If I don't get a good eval, I'm not going to be able to be up for promotion. It just stifles your whole thing. Like you said, I can understand why nobody would want to listen to the feedback at
Yeah.
that point.
Right. Right.
That's pretty cool. I didn't realize that he had written a paper that was the most cited in the 70s. It's kind of like it's almost like Bandura level kind of citations.
Oh, Herb Meyer. I will always remember. He was probably 90 when he was teaching me. But yeah, I'll always remember that stuff. And I was talking to another professor, and he was like, "You listen to Herb Meyer. He turned the field on its ear." And I'll always remember that quote from this other guy too. He
Oh, that's
turned the
cool.
field on its ear. It was different after he had that sort of research, and it was research. He was at GE, and he was doing personnel research then, which is awesome.
Nice. No, that's very cool. And when you get on those kind of studies, those kind of landmark studies, it's really, like I said, it's so much that's based off of that. It's really cool to know somebody that was involved in that type of thing.
Yeah, yeah. Herb Meyer, that was his name.
Nice. All right. Well, definitely. I no doubt if I went through all my material, I would probably have some stuff that we studied on him. But I'm definitely put it this way: we got a lot of Albert Bandura, and so quite a bit. So more than Herb Meyer, but like I said, we got a quite a dose of Bandura's work during my program. But I wanted to go back. You were talking about assessing skills, and I wanted to try to figure out, since you mentioned kind of getting rid of the and the freak out involved. Oh my God, what do you mean we're not going to ask for a bachelor's degree? What do you mean
Right.
we're not going to ask for 10 years experience doing whatever it is that we're going to be doing? At some point, like, okay, well, how do you determine the types of skills needed for the job? And then how do you go about assessing whether these folks have it or not?
Yeah. Yeah. And so the first response to your first question. So that is what we would call a job analysis, and it's I think broader than a job analysis in a lot of cases. It's a job and an organization analysis, a
Mm.
situation analysis. So what are the skills that it takes to do the job effectively? What knowledge do you need, and to some extent, what underlying abilities? Um, that's the type of thing. What personality do you need? And the key here is it can't be a list of 20 things. It can't, because everything you add to the list, you wash out the previous thing. And so you
Yeah,
really have to determine, and I've always said maybe eight. I can deal with maybe eight things, because likely those eight aren't going to be completely orthogonal, unrelated to each
right.
other. They're going to be somewhat overlapping, and so really identify these things again. Whether it's a hard skill, whether it's a personality or a soft skill, whether it's a certain type of knowledge, or some sort of underlying ability. Let's refine that down, and also link it to an actual activity that's done on the job. That's sometimes a really good way to determine, what do I think is important and what is really important. It's, can I cite an important duty for the job, that, oh yeah,
Mm.
I need this knowledge because this job is responsible for that, and he's the only one responsible for that. And you go, okay, well then that's a legitimate thing to have on the job. Sometimes we call those linkages between our competencies and our task or our duties.
Well, that makes sense. So now when you do that job analysis and you kind of whittle down, okay, here's the 6, 7, 8 skills that they really need to have. Because, like I said, I'm sure if you're working with a team internally, they're gonna, like you said, they're gonna want to make it 37 things,
Yep.
and it's like, yeah, that ain't gonna happen, right? That
Yep.
no, 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 it can't happen. Um, which funny and closest story I got to that. I heard an old preacher one time talking about, the perfect description of a preacher, right? He's 25 years old, but he's been preaching for 30 years, right?
That's
He
right.
drives a nice car, but he makes only like 18 grand a year, right?
That's right.
He's in the office all the time, but he's always making the hospital calls. It's kind of like, kind of how the board thinks of how they want to hire somebody. And it just sounded a whole lot like what you were saying. They've got all these grandiose, hey, we want this. So like that person doesn't exist, right? You can't,
Right.
yeah, you can't be good at that many things and think that's going to stick and you're going to find somebody. But once you do whittle it down to that 6 to 8, how do you actually assess a candidate to see
Right.
you got the goods or not, boss?
Right. And that's a lot of what I cover in the book.
Oh,
And
cool.
again, this book, and I've written it for hiring managers. So it's an HR topic, but it's really written for hiring managers. And
Okay.
I think it's a pretty, getting down to the basics, step by step. What should be the first step in the process? Then the next, and then the next. And we think of the hiring process as a funnel where you have a lot of people up at the top, and then what are the
Right.
steps that you take to identify your final candidates? And
Mm.
so a lot of times, an early step is going to be some sort of computerized psychometric assessment, which is different than when I started my career. Um, the tests weren't computerized at that point, and so they had to be done in person. And so the whole situation was different. And now the tests are virtually all computerized. And if you're concerned about cheating or whatever, you can have proctors, you can have live remote proctors, or you can have AI kind of proctors that are flagging, suspicious behavior that people can check later on video. And so even in the last 5 years, this has improved greatly to the point where I absolutely recommend early on in the hiring process uh, a set of psychometric tests, and again, hard skills and soft skills, to
Right.
whittle it down from, in a lot of cases, let's say 200 to some number less than 100. Uh, and then after that, this is all, it's a back and forth, because it's not just the company making decisions about the applicants. The applicants are also making decisions about the company. And so at every step in the process, it's like the company screens out people, and then certain people just disappear from the hiring process. And so once it starts going, people start to drop out of the hiring process. And of course, some of the times you worry that, are my best people dropping out of the hiring process? And you go, oh crap, I'm losing all my best people. But if they're dropping out of the hiring process because they're seeing things, real things in your organization that would make them a bad fit, then I want them dropping out of the hiring process. And so as this goes on, I want there to be a realistic organizational and a realistic job preview. So the applicants understand what it's going to be like to work there. And some people are going to drop out. They're going to say, you know what? I don't want to work shift work.
Yeah.
I don't like to get my dirt under my fingernails. Okay. I don't want, not only do I not want to convince them to stay in the hiring process, I'm happy that they're leaving the hiring process. Not because I'm a mean person, because a month later after being hired, the person is going to say, I can't even clean my fingernails.
Yeah, well, and then you spend all that money interviewing, hiring, onboarding, and it's just a waste. And I mean, I don't have to tell you how expensive turnover is. I mean, my
Right.
goodness. I mean, but I just remember we talked about it offline. A friend of mine that ran a, manufacturing plant, and I was joking with him that you're basically taking plastic bottles and putting it into cardboard boxes all day long, right? Cool, but they had like 4 temp agencies trying to hire this to get butts in seats. All right, can you fog a mirror? All right, man, you're good. Come
Right.
on, you're hired. It was that bad, and they were just rolling through. And I was joking with them about, hey, you got these folks that are people. You got a high eye kind of person that's needs to have human interaction. You have safety glasses and hearing protection, headphones, and stick them out there with no human interaction for 12-hour shifts at a time. I mean, either A, he's going to be written up all the time being at the water cooler, hanging out, or more likely what's happening, he lucky if he lasts 3 weeks,
Right.
and then he's like, I'm out of here. And then the churn is just killing you. And
Right.
especially, like I said, they don't see it's not on your P&L statement. Let's just put it
Right.
that way. Your CFO doesn't give you a P&L statement, say, hey, here's your cost of turnover this month.
No. And that's what we need. We need to find the people who will like to work there, because I've worked in a lot of heavy industrial places, and there are some operators who love to be outside. They love to be in the heat. They love to dig with their hands. They like to smell something weird and then figure out where that weird smell is coming from, and they get all excited when they're talking about that. And it's like, that's what I want. That's what I want. I may set up the job so it's hard for anybody to fail, but
Right.
lots of people might not like working there, but there are a few people who will like working there. I want to hire those people.
Yeah, because they stay, and you're like, well, I'm not going to get as many candidates as I want if I do that. Well, yeah, but you're going to get the right ones, and they're going to stay.
Yep. Get the right candidates. I don't care how many there are. And I say that in all seriousness. It's if I'm going from 100 and now I just got 2 final candidates, if those are the right two, and people aren't leaving the process because your process was terrible, but because
Yeah,
they honestly wouldn't like the job, then yeah, value those 2 people. Make sure those 2 people get hired, because chances are those are going to be the people who would stay, and the other 98 or the other 98 people, yeah, I mean, it's probably a good thing that they dropped out. I'm fine with that.
and hopefully they set up their processes to where, like you said, they're leaving because I don't want the job and this isn't a good fit, versus I made the process so
Right.
arduous that the
Right.
good people are like, man, I'm out of here. Because I laugh. I've looked at jobs and I've applied for jobs before where you know, maybe not to the quite to the hey, easy apply. Just click the LinkedIn button, right? And it's automatically okay, you've applied and you're gone. I mean, not bad. I mean, can't get any easier than that, right? A little bit of demographic information, upload a CV or resume. Okay, that's fairly simple. But then sometimes you go places and it's like, and whatever software they're using, they ought to be ashamed of themselves, man. That software company sold that to that company because the application process is so arduous. You're sitting there like this is worse than the federal government, man. It's like 3 hours to fill out an application, and you're like, no. And then the real killer, and I'd love to get your thought on this. Job sounds interesting. Somebody sees it, right? I have no idea how much it pays. And then you make it where it's going to take them an hour and a half to fill out an application because it's just so arduous, right? And so, at one point, I know, oh, this is a great paying job, pay transparency up front
Right.
versus, okay, it's worth maybe going through this extra process. Is there a time where maybe, hey, there's going to need a lot of concentration, focus, and persistence in this job? So maybe that long candidate application is a measure of persistence. We're doing it on purpose, or hey, we're shooing away some of our best folks.
Yeah,
What do you think?
I think by and large it's shooing away the best folks because okay, let's get everybody, let's make them come in person, let's turn the heat up in the room, and let's see how long people last, right? I mean, that's let's make the hiring process unpleasant, and then the people who remain are the people who really want the job. Yeah, the people who remain are probably the most desperate people, and you feel for them, but that's not really what your hiring process is designed for. But there is
Gotcha.
something that I want to get to, which is the
Sure.
very end of the hiring process. And so after your psychometric assessments and your realistic job reviews and your discussions with the recruiters and stuff, you have your interviews. Okay,
Right.
the interview is a whole different conversation as far as I'm concerned. Um, and I'm sure you have a lot of stories about bad interviewers, inappropriate interview questions,
Oh
crazy
God,
ways of
yes.
evaluating candidates. But okay, even after that, I've found a lot of times it's not clear who the final person should be. Okay, you had
Right.
100 applicants, you had multiple steps in the hiring process, you interviewed 6 people. Okay, 3 of those 6 they weren't as good as the other ones, but now you've got 3. And then, okay, how do I make this final decision? Because only one of them can get the job. So how do I'm happy with all 3, or I'm equally unhappy with all 3? Sometimes that's the situation. So how do I make that decision? And um, I know the first time I hired somebody, I was in this type of situation. There weren't that many people, but we got down to a couple, and I said, I
Right.
like each of them. How should I make the decision? And my boss said, oh, just go with your gut. And I'm like, are you serious? Because we were trying to sort of make this a whole kind of scientific process, and this is what it takes to pass and everything. And then at the end it's just like, whatever, who you're most comfortable with. It felt weird, and it felt weird then, and as I reflect back on it, I feel even worse about it now. That's bad advice that I think most of us have been given at some point. I think who you hire is actually the most important question uh, throughout this process. And so you need to be able to articulate why you're hiring this person and not these other people. And if you can't do that, then maybe you're just not thinking about it right. So some of the times you meet with HR and you can just sort of hash things out, and after a discussion you go, oh, you know what, things crystallized, things clarified in my mind. But sometimes
Gotcha.
you just don't have enough information. And so that final step in the process, sometimes you need additional information. And that's something we've been helping with companies with recently is if needed, implementing a job relevant role play exercise at the very end of the hiring process that can be done quickly, that doesn't take a ton of candidate time, and will provide valid but unique information. So it's not just another interview, it's not just
Right.
another psychometric test. It is unique information that can really help companies determine, oh, you know what, it's this person. This is my best person for this reason, and these other people, they're great too, but they don't compare. And so it's, if needed, getting new, valid, unique information at the end there, and for various reasons, we're able to do this uh, in a more time effective way than we used to because of computers and stuff. And I can do it cheaper than I ever had been before. That's the issue I ran into earlier in my career, is it took too much time. In order for me to not charge a lot for it, I had to undervalue my time. And now it's like, oh, there are different things that I can do, and I can get to a useful report quickly, and it's a good report. So
Nice. Well, I mean, think about it, with COVID and everything, everybody getting a lot more comfortable and used to jumping on Zoom or Teams or something like that. And if you were doing these in person before, then the most economical way to do it was, okay, there's three final candidates. Well, you got to fly out to wherever they're at,
right,
set your stuff up, and then have all three come in back to back to back, or it's not worth your time to do it. Where
right.
now you can, hey, here's a Calendly link, right? And pick a
And
day
that,
sometime this week and jump on for a half hour and let's do this thing, right?
absolutely, that is absolutely right, and you're right. Even with the Calendly link, it's like the administrative stuff is just easier than it used to be, and all that. When you're thinking about, as a consultant, charging for your time, it's, I, I want my I want the time that I spend to be a valuable use of my time. And
Yeah.
when it's 6 emails back and forth trying to schedule an event, it's like that's a bad use of the money that they're giving me for this. So it's just it's so much better than it used to be. But this isn't an AI assessment. This is like uh I've done, I was trying to add this up, about 1,000 the various types of assessments of
All
people
right.
in my career. Other people, teammates that I work with, are sort of similar, or even more. So, man, uh, it the technology has made these intensive human assessments cheaper, which is awesome.
Which I think you were using an example before, and we'll kind of wrap up on this, and then we'll tell the listeners how they can connect with you a little bit more about getting the book or whatever. But when you're hiring somebody for a management position or a sales position or a specific type of role, having them, well, how would you deal with, doing something stereotypical? How would you deal with a difficult employee who, under this situation and this specific set of circumstances, go right, and you paint them the picture, give them the scenario, and then, like I said, you're playing the part of the disgruntled employee that needs to be counseled on X or whatever
Right.
that is, right? And so explain that a little bit, because that was really cool when you were, and just to kind of give listeners an idea of, oh, okay, that's what he means when he says that.
Yeah. So a role play assessment is basically what you started to talk about. And so how this works is, a company will say, okay, we have our two final candidates. Can you do an assessment of them? I say, sure. Send me their contact information. And at that point, the hiring organization doesn't really have to be involved. And then I schedule a time, or somebody else I work with will schedule a time to meet with the candidate. And we're asking for 1 hour of candidate's time. And so
Right.
how this works is, they say, okay, at 2 o'clock on Tuesday, I'm available from 2 to 3. And I say, okay, great. At 2 o'clock, you will receive an email. That email will have background information, and it's not a ton of background information. It's a couple of sort of, you know report kind of background things.
Right.
20 minutes later, you'll get on a Zoom call with me or the other, again, expert veteran assessor, and we'll go through this role play kind of situation. And so in your background materials, it'll say, okay, you're going to be playing the role of a new sales manager, and you're going to be meeting with one of your team members. Here's some background on this team member. And then when we call in to the Zoom, I'm playing that role. And you're you, but you're you in this role. And then there's a bit of a back and forth, but really we're letting the person drive the meeting at that point. And the meeting will only take 20 minutes. And then we actually get off the call. We get on another Zoom link. And so at that point, I've changed my name in the Zoom and stuff. And we have what I call a debrief interview. Okay,
Gotcha.
now I'm really Mark. So tell me, how did you spend your time when I sent you that email to begin with? Okay, I read it. I was initially confused, but I put together a plan or whatever. And then another question is like, how did you think the meeting went? Because I know how I think it went, but it's always
Yeah.
interesting to hear their perspective. And there are a couple of other questions. And so we're asking for an hour of candidates time, 20 minutes of prep, 20 minutes of role play, and then another 20 minutes of debrief, and then that's it. And then from that, we take a bunch of our notes, and so at that point, we've got a bunch of type notes. We turn it into a nice standardized report based on just a relatively few number of competencies, and then we'll send that over to the client company.
Nice. Have you seen anybody just either, I hate to say, take it way too serious or just freak out when you start going through the scenarios?
They take it serious. I think a lot of times you'll see they have a specific plan going in,
Got
but
it.
I think just what Mike Tyson had said, right? Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the nose, and I'm not trying to be like too provocative, but I'm playing my character, and I may say something that they don't expect me to say. Okay, now we flip the script a little bit, and now they have to go on their own what they think they should do, not based on what they planned to do, but it's this live interact, and then within a couple of minutes, I see the real person, and they're playing a role, but they're playing a role, but they're them.
Yeah.
And you get great information. I've gotten yelled at. I've gotten fired. I had one. The guy just starts calling me names, and it's like, this is crazy behavior. I love it.
Possibility he didn't get recommended for hiring. Just saying.
That's probably true. But you know what? Some of the times you type up a report and you have something weird, and they go, "Oh, that's just like Brian." Oh yeah, he's a great fit. No, we can tolerate that. So some of the times, what is thought of for me as like a weakness or some sort of oddity, the company will realize that's actually not a bad fit here, because again, we're not looking for the perfect person, we're looking for the right fit.
Nice. Well, that's cool. That's a big surprise, because I would think somebody loses their mind, starts yelling at somebody. It's like, it's probably not who you want on a team. No, everybody yells at everybody. That's just how the way we do it. Cool. Well, then you just found another one. Merry Christmas, right?
That's right. No, if Gordon Ramsay hires us, then the chef who starts berating other people, he's like, oh, I love that guy.
Yeah, exactly. Good example. Good example. So with that, let's tell our listeners how they can connect with you, your company, the book, the website, connect with you on LinkedIn. Basically, soak in all the Dr. Mark goodness. How do they do that?
Okay, well, yeah, I'm sure you'll have some information about me in the show notes or whatever, because people always find it hard to find somebody with a last name of Smith. But on
The
LinkedIn,
LinkedIn profile link to that right on there, and any kind of relevant website link. Yeah, 100%.
yeah, right, and there'll be some information about the book. So
Yes.
a better
Link
choice.
Amazon link.
That's right. The Manager's Guide to Skills First Hiring. I think it's a useful book, and lots of people have given me feedback about it. It's easy to read, which that was the intent. And then my website is abetterchoicehire.com. So it's abetterchoicehire.com. And I'll tell you what, if people are interested in the book and interested in maybe working with us, contact or go to the website, abetterchoicehire.com. Go to the contact page, which should be easy. You see it right on the top. And shoot me a note. If you have a informational meeting with us, we'll send you a book. And if you want, I'll even sign it for you. I've signed probably more books than are unsigned out there, but that's a way to get a copy. If you want a copy of the book, if you want a signed copy of the book, we can certainly do that.
There you go. Talk to Mark about your perfect candidate selection and get a signed copy of his new book. Can't beat it.
There
I
you go.
love it. I love it. Well, thank you again for being on here. Definitely enjoyed the conversation. And that is all we have for this episode of Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave. So we will see you all next time. And please make sure and check out all of his info in the show notes. Take care.